So the Marvel Rivals playtest has finally come to an end. And I think it's about time to put out some closing thoughts on it. Put just over an entire day into this game, over 24 hours in 10 days, without playing it for one of the week. And I can say that as a whole, the game feels pretty polished, has some major bugs in it that really undermine the experience. Feels very laggy. There's lots of no-reg moments where like just hit registration just is not there. There are 3 maps in the game, and they're not good. Some of them are just a wide open space, and the other ones are nothing but choke points. The fact that it's 6v6 is nice. I also don't think the people who are saying that the game needs roll queue are giving the game a chance, because it's easy enough to default to how Overwatch is played in another game, but this game fundamentally isn't Overwatch. Also, a lot of the character designs kind of blur the lines between tanks, DPS, and supports, which means I don't think roll queue would actually be as successful in this game. It is a working tournament mode and a working clan mode in alpha, stuff that Overwatch has promised for years now and still has not delivered. The fact that it's third person means you can actually see your skins and the game feels a little bit less noisy, which is very impressive to say because there is so much shit going on at every instance in this game. It is a working replay viewer, eat your heart out Valorant with actual markers in it that let you see like deaths and ults and stuff like that on the timeline, so it's easier to find moments that happen. It is a sort of weird problem where there's no health regen in the game, which means that if your supports aren't doing great and you're stuck in a bad position, you kind of just die. But also the flip side of that is there are way too many health packs in the game. So if you're camping a health pack, you're basically constantly getting healed to full, and you don't even need to deal with supports. So I think tuning down the health packs and adding a bit of regen could do a lot to make the game feel a little less frustrating. CC isn't that infuriating in this game. It's still annoying to get stunned, but when you get stunned for the majority of the time, you're also damage immune, so it's more of just getting an enemy out of a fight for a bit, as opposed to now we spam every cooldown on this character and they implode and they can't do anything. This is a very strange one for hero shooters. I think this game needs a mantle ability. In most third-person shooters that have hypermobile characters, there's the ability to get up surfaces that you just barely missed, because it can be a little bit harder to judge your movement in third person. Can't tell you the number of times I'm playing a melee character or just someone with not a lot of great movement opportunities where I just barely miss a ledge and I slide down and die, or I get stuck on terrain, especially the destructible terrain, which means that like I really feel like you need to be able to vault stuff. If you're playing like Groot and you use one of his walls as a ramp and it just barely doesn't clear with your jump, you're shit out of luck and you wasted a cooldown, which is just really annoying. Performance of the game is terrible. It uses 100% of your CPU. Granted, it's an alpha, but Jesus Christ. The content creator NDA stuff was really shady. I'm glad they walked that back. And also just in general, the destructible terrain feels really frustrating. Everything feels like it's made out of paper, but it also respawns at the most inopportune times. I think it needs to either respawn like every couple minutes, like maybe 2 or so minutes, and then it'll respawn and have a bit more health so it's a little bit less free to break, because what ends up happening is all of the cover gets destroyed and you're stuck fighting Hitscans, which we will get to them later, in a giant open field, and then the second that you actually close that distance on the Hitscan player, everything turns green and a building appears out of the floor and you're fucked. Now we're going to talk about character specific stuff. Starting off with tanks, Doctor Strange. He is the only tank in the game that has like really strong solo kill options with animation cancels on his primary fire. For some reason, Strange can't glide, but Magneto can't. If you haven't played the game, you won't know why this is really frustrating. Magneto has no mobility, but he can glide downwards, whereas Doctor Strange has a fly, but he can't glide once the fly is complete. Every time he opens a portal, it still drops the game to 30 frames, so I really hope that gets fixed. But as a whole, I feel like his design is really solid and he's really fun to play. Groot. Groot says, "I am Groot" every 2.5 seconds. I get that that's all he can say, but holy shit, it's so annoying. This character is going to be one of the most hated tanks in the game. I'm calling it now. He is borderline unkillable, especially with his ridiculous synergy with Rocket. He has basically infinite uptime on his walls. Primary fire feels like it should have more range than it does, or do more than it does. His synergy is ridiculous with his team-up. He can lead to a lot of visual clutter where you've got like 3 Groot walls up, but also like 3 Namor turrets, 2 other Lokis on the map. Rocket is putting down a million different buildables that all kind of look the same, but they all do different stuff, and one of them isn't breakable, and it can make it a real headache to clear them out. Fortnite boxing someone with his walls, or Fortnite boxing yourself to sustain, is actually really fun, though. That's easily the most fun part of this kit. I never thought I'd see the day where I would say Fortnite boxing was a thing in a hero shooter, but it is, and it is way funnier than it has any right to be. Magneto. He can glide for some reason. The only thing that he has in his kit that puts him in the air is his ultimate, so he can glide after ulting. Kinda weird. He feels like he needs his synergy to be strong. Other than that, he just kind of feels like a worse Strange. He has worse damage output, worse shield. Granted, it's like unbreakable, so that's kind of cool. But I don't know, he just feels not the best. His ult is really cool. It's basically like a giant, like, explosive rock, but it's reliant on charging up damage from enemy projectiles, so it like soaks up all the damage in the air and is like a borderline defensive ult, but the more damage they do, the more damage it does. He's also a villain, well, at least hypothetically a villain. I don't know the lore around this Magneto. He could be a redeemed Magneto, but there aren't enough villains in this game, so that's actually really nice. For my notes here, I just wrote Penny Parker. This character is so fucking weird, man. She has like all these weird gimmicks around spider mines. Her entire kit centers around putting mines that are invisible in nets that are also a super obnoxious CC option that is also her mobility. But then there's like a bunch of weird stuff. Like, if you use your tether, which is like your Spider-Man swing, it puts up a web by itself, but you can also use it to a web that is already placed. There's no benefit to using a web that's already placed, so you're basically just losing web uptime by using this to tether to something you've already put down. There should be some sort of reward with sacrificing one of your stuns to set up a web to swing to. She's kind of almost a dive tank. Like, she's got mobility. Her ult is super clunky. The mines are terribly explained. I don't know if it's like a translation thing or they just didn't really care, but it is so confusing to learn how to play this character. In her ultimate, she just kind of waddles around haphazardly slashing at people and just shitting mines everywhere, and it's super annoying. And then her primary fire is just cheeks. It's not a good primary fire. That's kind of a through line with a lot of the tanks that aren't Strange. Their primaries are dog. And I saved this tank for the melee DPS section because I think a lot of his problems are synergistic with all the melee characters. Hulk. Hulk is the only real dive tank in this game, which I think is greatly limiting his usability. Like, imagine playing Overwatch, but you only have D.Va. Like, you don't have the Winston to synergize with it. At, like, launch Overwatch, not now. I know that now you never have a second tank because we've decided 5v5 is great for some reason. It feels really hard to hit people with Hulk. He's also weirdly difficult, which we're talking about the Hulk. He should be, like, the simplest character in the game, I feel like. His only ranged option is a cooldown that does okay damage. His ult feels good mostly because it gives him a lot of iframes, which stops him from being absolutely shredded. His team up feels really boring. Hulk is one of the few melee characters that actually kind of has an answer to flyers, but it's super committal because his jump, like his initiation option, is really long of a cooldown to like charge up. So you really have to charge up your dive, which has no cooldown, to land in the backline or try and hit a flyer. Then use your like Zarya bubble to charge up to jump out, otherwise you'll die. It's weird that he doesn't have some sort of self-sustain if he's a melee dive tank. Like, think about like Doomfist and imagine Doomfist as a tank without his overhealth. That's what Hulk feels like. It feels like you get in, you start doing damage, they turn around and you implode. He also gets shredded by hit scans because he can't really get in on them super well, and most of the hit scans also have ridiculous mobility for some reason. So the one matchup he's supposed to be good in, like diving the Hela, she just turns into a fucking raven and flies halfway across the map, and you can't get her because she's already dinked you twice and her team is turned around and you've wasted your bubble, so you have to jump out. I think a lot of the melee characters in this game either need bigger hitboxes or a passive speed boost, because the next most infuriating thing about them is when you are chasing down a target you know you can beat, but you get burnt down because they're walking backwards. So they just kind of outrun the Hulk. This is a game where tiny little raccoon can just waddle away from the Hulk while shooting him with a minigun. That just doesn't feel right. Also, hit detection with almost all the melee characters is cheeks. You will whiff stuff that you swear should be so free. Black Panther, stop me if you've heard this before. Melee character, so has really hard time killing things. Black Panther feels a lot like Doomfist and Genji in this game, but not in the good ways, in the buggy ways. His entire kit centers around a dash reset, but the dash reset is contingent on a debuff. What gets rid of this debuff? I don't know, because sometimes it just vanishes. It doesn't seem to be a time thing or an attack thing, because sometimes I attack people while it's on them and it doesn't go away, and sometimes I attack people while it's on them and it vanishes. Not to mention sometimes it just doesn't connect. So you'll dash through people with the move that gets the reset, but it won't reset it, which puts it on like a 12-second cooldown, meaning your escape option that should have been guaranteed is gone. You just die for that. It's like if Genji didn't have shurikens and instead just had dash all the time, but dash was 10 times buggier than it already is. I also think his ult should probably reset his cooldowns. It doesn't really do a ton, but at least giving him his cooldowns back would just be a nice quality of life. Also, because of how buggy the dash is, you kind of have to save one of his cooldowns as like a get out of jail free option for when your character bugs out and loses his other get out of jail free option and dies for no reason, which has to be like one of the most infuriating things on the planet. Also, his team up synergy is booty cheek ass chunks. He can use Magic's portals, and Magic only gets her portals when she's paired with Black Panther and other leaked characters. These portals are awesome for Magic, but like for Black Panther, it's like a sim TP that only you can use. It's like if none of the rest of your team could utilize the sim TP. So it's just sort of a way in or a way out for you, and it doesn't really feel like it stays up long enough. Also, pressing C to interact with a teleporter fucks with my brain, but that's mostly just the game being new thing. Also, just the synergy idea being to pair two melee characters together has to be one of the dumbest ideas for a team comp in general. Magic is already pretty good on her own, so why are we pairing her with one of the worst melee DPS characters in the game so that we get absolutely shat on by flying characters? Spider-Man's actually really fun to play once you fuck around in his settings and find out that the web shooting is one of the worst default settings of all. Auto web shoot is like Lucio no backwards wall ride levels of terrible. It does feel pretty clunky to move around as Spider-Man. I think the swing is a little bit too fast from a balance perspective and a control perspective. But there are times where you're playing Spider-Man and it feels like you're playing the Insomniac Spider-Man games, but against real players. He definitely earns his spot as a 5-star difficulty character. And he also does have a ridiculously strong ult. So even when he's not doing a lot, just staying alive long enough to build that ult is impact. He also has the same problems with Black Panther where a lot of his abilities are based on a debuff, and because of the lagginess of the game, the performance of the game, and bugginess of the game, the debuff doesn't always feel super consistent, plus hit detection on projectiles isn't great, so a lot of the time Spider-Man feels very clunky to play, or like you're missing things that should have been guaranteed. And probably a good 90% of that is because I'm ass at him, but a good 10% of that is stuff that I can feel on other characters that I'm much better with and know for a fact is the game's fault. He might just need time for people to learn him. Magic. If I didn't completely half-ass this video, you should be watching a bunch of Magic gameplay for this entire time. I think she is the most fun character in this game. She feels wholly unique to this game. She is a squishy DPS with overhealth generation, with a giant fucking sword, like a Guts from Berserk level sword. And she's one of the only melee DPS in the game that has the hitboxes to do stuff, but because she has the hitboxes to allow her to do things like challenge flyers, it can feel really rewarding to get picks on them. But I just feel like melee characters in general need like hit stalling on their fall if it connects. I think all the melee characters could benefit from sort of stalling themselves in the air. But Magic is the only character that can kinda do this. Her shift ability doesn't get affected by gravity, at least not a lot, and the imp demons she puts down also don't get affected by gravity. So you can kinda dash up with your E, put the imp on the flyer so it does some damage, and then as you're falling, charge up your right click and hit them in the air and kill them, which aside from Spider-Man is really the only melee character in the game that can kill a flyer while they're in the air. The rest of them are pretty contingent on getting them out of the air first, or just waiting for your hit scan to kill them. Her ult feels super skillful because it doesn't have iframes in the startup. If they give this ult iframes, I think it will kill the character completely. It is a full cooldown reset, but it has startup activation with no iframes where you are unable to act out of it. So you kind of have to like weave into cover, pop it, get your cooldowns back, and go into the fight. But it doesn't really buff your survivability unless hits start connecting. Her sort of cleave spin attack almost always feels like the worst of the two options for her. Dropping the imp on someone does so much more damage and gives you so much more shields than the cleave ever does. And it also feels like it doesn't do as much damage as it should. It's really just for cleaning up a lot of picks at the same time or destroying environments or like other characters. It's also slower for rollouts from spawn, so it's like when you start playing Magic, you're inting all the time because you're using this kind of dog ass ability, but when you start using imps instead, it's so fucking fun. Her projectile is also massive and seems to have at least a little bit of tracking, or it's just that big, because the amount of flyers that end up dead to this ability is kind of crazy. Also, the Black Panther synergy for Magic is really good because giving her another mobility option is just insane. I do still think she, like the rest of the DPS in this game, needs just sort of a speed boost. Don't just sit there looking sad in the background. All right, now onto the flyers. For the flyers, first up we have Iron Man. Iron Man feels like a very pub stompy character, and a lot of the DPS feel like this. He gets shut down so hard by Hitscan, and again, we will get to them, but he's basically like a Pharah that never stops flying. Because of that, he's so goddamn slow in the air when he's not using his boosters. All of his abilities feel kind of bland, but I feel like Iron Man as a character in general is pretty bland, so I guess it's true to his character. Storm is basically the same thing if she just kind of didn't do shit. She has speed boost and also damage boost. Kind of like Lucio, it's like an AoE, but she's a DPS, which is a really cool idea. But because of this, her damage output feels like abysmal, and her abilities aren't super well conveyed. She's very simple, but like, again, she's very vulnerable to hit scan. She's not that fast even with speed boost. And like the only real redeeming factor of both her and Iron Man are their ults that are pretty much a guaranteed pick or two. Scarlet Witch is a bit of a hot take. I actually think she's really well designed. She's basically a DPS Moira if she was designed to be a DPS Moira. She's technically in the flying section because I don't know where else to put her. Plus, she can fly, but it's more of like a glide down, and then she uses her blinks or like fades to get up. So basically her suck charges up abilities, stop me if you've heard this before, that are a resource meter. But this resource meter is her range damage. So I think by simply tweaking down the amount of damage the suck does and increasing the damage that the projectiles do, it could actually make her pretty fun. Her ult was thought of to be ridiculously powerful for the first day or two. At this point, it's like a diva bomb. If you get caught by it, you're kind of just not very good. That is saying even if she gets it off, which usually they don't. I think she'll be extremely broken below plat. And she buffs Magneto to like viability, but she doesn't really seem to get as good of a buff from Magneto, which feels wrong. It feels like it should be a two-way street like it is with like Rocket and Groot. And then we got two categories left: hit scan and support. For hit scan, first off, we got Namor. I don't know if he's technically a hit scan, but like Hanzo is counted as a hit scan in Overwatch, even though he isn't hit scan. So like these are like your main DPS types. Namor is fucking boring. His entire abilities are turret and spear. He has an ability that is just spear but bigger and lets his turrets focus on you, which feels like that should be the case with the spear period. It's not really that good for animation cancels either. His ult is kind of and his little bubble he does is just like delaying the inevitable. It's basically just a self-stun that puts you in the air for some reason. He can't move while he's in it, and he usually dies the second it ends unless he's about to wipe their team anyways. His synergy is he gets ice turrets. Don't really know what ice turrets do different from other turrets. They're only minorly annoying at all times to play into, and I can't stand playing Namor long enough to figure out what they do for myself. So I'm not really going to comment on them, but playing into them, they feel kind of pointless. Pretty annoying for melee characters that aren't magic though. For Star-Lord, all I wrote was so ridiculous. He's basically Tracer with no fall off. His blink/roll ability just reloads his weapons, so he can use the three of them to just continuously fire at one target and guarantee a pick on them. He does insane damage with no spread and no fall off. His ultimate is ridiculously good. Basically a guaranteed team wipe. I've killed people through Luna Snow beats with this. Just an absolutely insane pick for the hit scans, and then just this is the case with all the fucking hit scans in this game. They're so annoying. He's super easy to play. He's not very hard to master. The Punisher has a zip line that only he is allowed to ride. He can 2-tap tanks with a shotgun. He also has ridiculously high damage with his primary fire, shuts down all of the flying characters in the game, shuts down most of the tank characters in the game, has an ultimate that turns him into Mauga, but he also shoots out Farah Barrage from his shoulders while he's doing it in case he wasn't doing enough damage. It's basically a guaranteed team wipe unless you've got Luna Snow ult, Mantis ult, or Magneto ult. Other than that, he'll just chew your entire team up. He's also the fucking Punisher, which sucks. That's such a boring character to have be this strong. I want this character sent out to the graveyard, so the only people who play him are those types of Punisher fans. Hela. This is the closest this game has to like Widowmaker. I didn't think she was hit scan for a while because I saw that she was throwing knives at people and assumed that's gotta be a projectile. Then I played her for one game, realized she was hit scan, and went like 24-3. I'm pretty sure it was a comp match too that I decided to break her out in because she seemed simple enough, and she is. Her ult is not as great as it was on the first few days of playing the game. By the end of the playtest, people really figured out how to sort of LOS it a bit more. Because she can't move, if she puts it in a bad spot, it's basically just a feed. But it's also a second life ultimate on a sniper carry, which means like imagine if instead of Infrasight on Widow, she had Dupe or like Diva Bomb. That's what we're talking about here. Her synergy is fucking stupid. Also, I didn't talk about this with Punisher. His synergy with Rocket gives him an bit next to him that gives him infinite ammo. And he also has a Bastion turret in case he wasn't brain dead and annoying enough. Sorry. Anyways, back to Hela. She has like an omnidirectional flight ability which she can't be damaged in, which feels dumb. If I can hit the tiny bird, it should kill Hela. She also has the most ridiculous synergy in the game, which is anytime she gets a pick, which is a lot of the time, because she basically has Echo's sticky bombs, DOT explosion on every pick she gets, and also 2-tap hit scan headshot. She will res Loki, who is one of the most obnoxious supports I've ever had the misfortune of seeing. And while we're at it, let's talk about Loki. Loki is so goddamn lame. He's also really unique, so like there's a chance he can be balanced down to be less obnoxious. So he makes clones, and he can switch his position with the clone. It's not really a question of which one's the real Loki, because the clones just sort of stand AFK shooting at walls most of the game, but because they're shooting at walls, they constantly break all of the destroyable stuff on the map, which means there's no cover for anyone. He also can turn invisible and leave a clone behind. So even if clone is on cooldown, his invisibility gives him it off cooldown, which is something I actually like a lot in this game. A lot of the abilities center around a resource rather than a specific ability. So multiple abilities activate that resource, which is really cool. It's really infuriating when that resource is a clone of Loki that has basically the same damage output and health as Loki at the cost of not being able to be healed, until it pops down a fucking immort ability that isn't even just an immort ability. It heals you for the damage you take. And it wouldn't be enough if this AoE immort ability dropped on Loki and had ridiculous amounts of health. Also has to drop on all of the Loki clones. So there can potentially be like 3, almost 4 different immorts up at the same time. Then you cut through the immorts and all the healing of all of his clones just to get the pick, just for one of your dipshits in the backline or that dumbass playing Iron Man or Storm to get picked by Hela, because of course they did, and he respawns instantly where he was because of Hela. Just a gross character as a whole. Rocket's pretty cool. I think he should be hit scan instead of projectile. It's weird to have a projectile minigun. His ultimate is basically just Bongo from Overwatch 1 Orisa, which is cool. He has a res beacon, which is pretty annoying. I think it'd be cool if it was like either LOS dependent or its range was considerably smaller. As it currently stands though, you kind of just use it so that like if you're playing a DPS character, you can take a really aggressive initiation fight and then die and then respawn in the backline, and it's more worth to do that than it is to just disengage with another ability, which is kind of cool, but it's also really infuriating when you pick someone and they get rezzed instantly. His synergy with Groot is really strong. His dash and glide are both really cool. He can climb up walls, which I haven't mentioned this, but there's a lot of characters in this game that can climb up walls, and I always forget they can do it, and then I'm like, holy shit, this is nice, until you run face first into a slight overhang and it fucks up your entire plan. He also says fuck all the time. Like, he doesn't actually say fuck, but he says fuck. It's not really a teen rated game if someone's saying fuck every 2 seconds. I mean, I personally think think it's really funny, but you know. And while we're at it, just in general, a lot of the quippier or like more snarky characters in this game do really have some obnoxious lines. My standout personal favorite is Spider-Man going, "It's gonna get sticky," every 2.5 seconds, which is just fucking great. Mantis. I don't know how to feel about Mantis. She kind of just feels like a worse Luna Snow. She has a stun like Luna does. Her ult feels very similar. She's kind of like Scarlet Witch, where she's like resource based, so like the healing she does is contingent on her doing damage. And then she's got a bunch of different buffs she can choose from, but they don't feel super impactful. She also just feels a bit more sauceless than a lot of the other supports do. Like, she's just kind of bland to play. She feels like a beginner support character, which she's still aim intensive. It's no like Mercy type deal. But speaking of Mercy, let's talk about pocketing in this game. And what better character to talk about that with than Luna Snow? Most of the supports in this game have sort of like heal outputs that I would say are comparable to like an Ana, where they're usually either a fast traveling projectile or a hit scan that does heal but also does damage, excluding Rocket, who I think actually has a really good answer to AoE heals, and that his balls that he shoots out slow down when they're doing the healing. But since they also heal him, he has to play extremely safe, otherwise his healing gets stalled on him and doesn't make it to his teammates in time. But if he shoots them too early and his teammates haven't taken damage, they just shoot right past them and bounce off walls. So it's actually like a really skillful Moira orb almost, which is a crazy sentence to say. Luna doesn't have any of that. She just heals very directly. I do think she's very fun to play, but I don't think she's remotely balanced. Her ult is insane. It's basically just a beat. You aren't killing anyone through it. It lasts forever. And if she decides she's done making everyone immortal, she can turn it into a damage boost, which just feels like too much. The ability to ice skate on her is kind of cosmetic. It doesn't really do much. It's a slight speed boost. You're only using this to get back from spawn, let's be real. She starts clapping at a certain point and shooting out 2 little icicles behind her back, which are really satisfying to hit. But then we get to the most just ridiculously broken part of her kit. She has a Zen orb that she can attach to anyone. It doesn't expire based on line of sight, and it gives full 1-to-1 healing of whatever target Luna is healing to whatever target this orb is placed on. On top of this, she also has pretty solid CC. But while she makes her team really strong, she herself isn't really that strong. And that's kind of a through line of all of the supports in this game. If you catch any of them out, excluding Loki with his immorts, you can kill them pretty easily, which is kind of nice because they're so overtuned in keeping their team alive that focusing them out is pretty viable. But they also duel pretty well, and they usually also have some sort of synergy with another character, which sort of ties them into playing with them. So I feel like support's actually pretty fun in this game, and I also think DPS and tank is pretty fun in this game. Most of the stuff has been talking about things that I think need tweaking and changing, so this video is very, very negative in terms of the problems that I think need fixing. But that's kind of the purpose of an alpha. I'm not saying that this game is bad or these changes need to be made, but I am saying that these changes would make the game less frustrating to play. I do think as a whole, all of the characters in this game feel pretty unique. Some of them feel amazing to play, some of them feel frustrating, and I can't wait for that next beta, which, spoiler alert, I think is coming in August, or console releases for this game, which are also probably coming up. Anyways, see you guys next time.